time.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another installment of TED Excellence, the show in which we find out who we should trust and who we shouldn't, and all the political idiosyncrasies in between, or something. And I come to you live from Crater Valley, with Dogcat Fox, a Pepperjack, and all of you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to Thursday. Terrible press conference Thursday. Yes, for those of you who just a few minutes ago were watching Sinatra Says and I commentate and comment on the recent press conference from President Joe Biden. Sorry, I got confused there for a second. I almost said Vice President Donald Trump for some reason. I don't know why I would say that. Yeah, that was something. That was something. And if you are listening to this in the future, well, you can go find that in the archives now. But all that being said, before I get to anything else, who's joining me on this beautiful Thursday evening? Kiever Denmother. Hi, Kiever Dam. And thank you, Kiever Dam, as always, for providing the links to our friends Moonshock, Natalie, Angela Arriaga, Rhonda, and Ashley. If you guys can take a look at those fundraisers at the top of the chat box and donate if you are able. And if you're not, if you can, share those out on social media. That would be appreciated. And thank you ahead of time for that. And thank you, Kiever Dam, as always, for providing the links for those. Shadowclaw, good evening. Noah Asensio, good evening. Luke Skywalker, too, good evening. I'm having deja vu or something here. I don't know why that is. Advocatus Diaboli, good evening. And wait a second here. There's a Derek LaRue. Derek LaRue, again, holy cats, Derek. Thank you so much. You donated previously, and thank you for this. That's very, I don't know what else to say, except thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the show, and hope you're having a good evening. Hope you're staying cool wherever you are. I'm doing my best. It's been another scorcher here, but that's just the way of things. Dear Alexander, good evening. Who else is here? Fostonia, good evening to you. The Blakester, good evening. Mike R., good evening. Funtime Bats, good evening to you. Shell D, good evening. Zero the Hero 909, good evening. Angelverse, good evening to you. Ercole Di Stefano, good evening. Caro Soldier, good evening. Matthew James, good evening to you. You're Ridiculous Lunatic, good evening. Shadowclaw, good evening. Who else is here? Roasted Opinions, good evening to you. Deterra Jones, good evening. Attack Alpaca, good evening. Who else is here? I think that's everybody I see. If I missed you, if you're lurking, if you're in the future, good evening. And I'll try to say a few more hellos as people arrive, as it were. Well, tonight, not exactly planned, but a bit, I guess it's a bit auspicious that I would have pre-picked this particular talk, given the events of the last, 2 hours or thereabouts. But we have a TED Talk tonight, not a TEDx, a TED Talk. And it all deals with, if you can believe it, how to spot authoritarianism and choose democracy. Authoritarianism can be very, very covert, very beneath the surface. I'm sure, and again, I haven't watched this ahead of time, but I'm sure that our speaker is not going to just say Trump bad for 15 minutes and call that detecting authoritarianism. I suppose we'll find out. Also, Erica Grenstatter, good evening. Jamie Milquist, good evening to you. Also, the speaker, if you see the original thumbnail on the TED site, you would be forgiven for thinking that the speaker is Jeremy Strong, the actor that played Kendall Roy, because from the angle and just the appearance of this guy for that photo, it sure looked like that Jeremy Strong was giving a TED Talk, or Kendall Roy was giving a TED Talk, but in fact, it is not either Jeremy Strong or Kendall Roy, the character he played on Succession. But again, you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise. I sure did at first glance. Rib Rascal, good evening. The Best Remy, good evening. All right, so tonight's bingo card is bingo card B. B as in Mumra. Mumra being the winner of the poll of the best tyrant out of the running was Monstar and as well Serpentor. But Mumra won the poll, and thus bingo card B is the bingo card. Links to the bingo cards are in the description below. Get your bingo card B ready, and we'll proceed in a moment here. Delafruit Zero, good evening to you. All right, this one clocks in at just over 16 minutes. Oh boy, we better get started. So get your bingo cards ready, and I'll start off with a few seconds for a sound test. And if somebody's revving their engine in the background, okay, if you guys can hear it, let me know.
So
At a different time of day.
So at a different time of day, other than the one we're in now, I guess. Okay, you guys hear that okay? Let me know in the chat. Let's see. Yes, Mumra the Ever Living. That is true. That is also that is his full official title. Urcalita Stefano says, sounds fine. 5x5 says, Kiro Soldier. Sounds good, says Mykar. Okay, at a different time of day.
Late, on the night before the American presidential inauguration in 2009.
2009. Okay, so Barack Obama.
I received an urgent message to go pick up a package at a random address in Washington, D.C.
Now, can you see why you could be forgiven for confusing this guy with Jeremy Strong, the actor? It is remarkable how at first glance I was like, that's not him. Anyway, you were instructed to get a package. Whose package? Well, what's in the box? What's in the box?
I was wearing a tuxedo. I was at the inaugural ball.
Oh, well, don't name drop or nothing.
The next day, I was supposed to enter the White House as a lawyer for the new president. But I slipped out of the ball and I ran in the rain to the designated address where the doorman of the building handed me a plastic grocery bag.
I guess that could be considered a package.
Bursting at the seams with 3 thick binders.
Were they full of women? Oh, wait, no, that was a Mitt Romney thing, wasn't it?
My name was written on a Post-it note stuck to the bag. Jason Bourne, etc.
Oh, okay. Ha, ha.
No.
Look at that audience. Boy, oh boy. Have you ever seen a more crowded, energetic... Yeah.
But I was supposed to bring the binders with me into the White House the next day. For the next 3 years in my service in the White House counsel's office, those binders would become my Bible.
Those binders would become your Bible. Okay, so wait a sec. So you were called away from the inauguration party to pick up binders you'd have to bring to the office the next day. I can't wait to hear how this is relevant to anything.
They had been left for me by a lawyer from a previous White House. And they
The previous White House or just a previous White House?
Contained in them memos dating to the Eisenhower era.
Oh, okay.
The White House chiefs of staff and counsel had sent to executive branch officials explaining what they could do and what they were not allowed to do in the performance of their duties.
Oh, and the Supreme Court just recently changed the equation on that as well, for better or worse.
And if White House staff had questions about those things, I'd just consult the binders. Okay. And if the binders didn't contain the answer, I'd call the lawyer who did my job for President Bush. And if he didn't know, we'd call the lawyer who did it for President Clinton.
No, it's almost like we need to better clarify and tighten up rules surrounding executive power or something, I guess.
Didn't matter whether you're working for a Democrat or Republican. The rules were consistent from administration to administration.
Yeah, that's the thing about laws that supersede the time of those that pass them.
And you learn very quickly in doing this work that most of those rules are not legally binding. They're just traditions, customs, what we've all come to call norms, which meant they were a choice. You can choose to follow them, or you could choose not to follow them.
Oh, sort of like, legal precedents versus actual laws, like Roe v. Wade. Or affirmative action, those kind of things.
And they contain things like rules prohibiting White House staff from calling the Department of Justice and telling them who to prosecute, who to investigate, because in a liberal democracy, those decisions are supposed to be made independently of politics.
Oh, of course they are. And yeah, they're supposed to. They are supposed to.
So after the 2016 American presidential election, my fellow council alumni and I began to grow concerned. What would happen if a leader chose not to follow those rules?
Well, I don't know. Let's ask Joe Biden.
What would happen if a leader organized a political movement in opposition to them?
Oh, I don't know. What would happen? If they're not legally binding, if they're just traditions, if they're just customs, what do you do?
Well, we didn't really need to wonder about that because leaders and movements like that have been rising across the world in the 21st century.
So you had, at least by this example, a movement that was challenging not laws, but unofficial custom and tradition.
These movements seek to replace liberal democracy with more authoritarian forms of government.
Yes, because liberal democracy could not in any way, shape, or form become authoritarian over time. As we know, there's no crossover. It's very binary. There's liberal democracy, and then there's authoritarianism. At no point could a liberal majority exercise authoritarian control over anything. It just can't happen, guys. It just cannot happen.
And so my fellow council alumni and I decided to launch, which was a modest effort at first, to try to apply what we learned from those binders to prevent that from happening in the United States.
Okay, so wait. So you were no longer involved with the White House. So you decided to start a movement, a legal movement, to firm up executive power. I mean, if that's your end goal, I'm not going to necessarily decry it, but I'm not quite sure where you're going.
We called our organization Protect Democracy.
Wow. Sounds very... It could be very sinister, depending on exactly what your goals and methods were. Sort of like saying we're the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Obviously, when we say something that sounds good, our motives, our actions, and our intentions are completely valid as well, right?
But as the threat has grown, so have our efforts. And so I want to take some time today to describe the specific nature of the threat and some choices we all can make to defeat it.
Okay, is the specific nature of the threat Donald Trump by any chance? Or is it the extent of executive power? Because everything that Trump might have done that broke quote-unquote tradition is anything that any president could have conceivably done. So I'm hoping that he's going to start attacking the weaknesses and the loopholes in the extent of executive power without bringing up a specific individual that just happened to go against tradition and not necessarily break the law. But we'll see. Anyway, let's go over the bingo card real quick to remind ourselves what we're listening for. Marginalize marginalization, self-vilification or wretchedness, contradicts own point or argument. We'll see. Feminism, microaggressions or unconscious bias, privilege, benevolent condescension. We might get there. Weightless example. We'll see. Plays victim, possibly so. Collectivizes own demographic. Yeah, I think every White House counsel before me, etc., the binders, that's collectivizing your own demographic. Economic disparity, not yet. Argumentative non sequitur, not yet. Attempt to coin new buzzword or buzz phrase. Well, protect democracy isn't really a new phrase or anything, but we'll see. A list. I'll bet we get a list somewhere. Excuse me. Mind reading or assumes motives. Yeah, because everybody who's not a liberal Democrat apparently is an authoritarian, I guess. Patriarchy, anecdote that probably never happened, diversity, equity, and inclusion, white supremacy, childhood or family anecdote, systemic or institutional. I'll wait and see if he uses the words. Leaves out vital context. We'll see. Sales pitch for product or service. Well, his organization has already plugged it once and is about to, excuse me. I took a drink of water and it went down the wrong pipe, as it were. He's already talked about his organization and he's about to get more explicit about their motives, goals, and otherwise, sort of circle sales pitch for product or service. And lastly, word salad. Not quite yet. So far on the board, we have collectivize his own demographic, free space because it's free, mind reading or assumes motives, and sales pitch for product or service. Remember, this is bingo card B. Let's continue.
Okay. So the first thing to understand is how these modern authoritarian movements dismantle democracies.
Oh, by declaring themselves to be pro-democracy? you wouldn't want to have to concede to that point, would you? It's like, hey, everybody, I'm pro-democracy. Now give all the power to me. It couldn't be that either, could it?
Because it's not like it was in the past.
Oh.
These days, typically, democracy doesn't die with a loud explosion and tanks rolling through the town square.
Oh, right. It's all very subversive, very, very subliminal. like a president coming out and saying they'll be the most transparent president ever. They're going to bring, bring the adults back to the room, bring dignity back to the office, and so on. That kind of thing, where you say something you don't actually mean.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the exception. More often in the 21st century, these authoritarian movements work like Trojan horses.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And only one side of the political equation ever commits such sins, right?
Typically, their leader comes to power through an election.
Yeah.
And then once inside, dismantles the system from within.
Right. Yeah. Lockdowns, mandates, violating the First Amendment by colluding with social media companies to suppress the voice of individuals and citizens. Yeah, it's true. That's true.
And they have a playbook for doing so.
Okay. Was it in the binders that you got by any chance? Like, here's all the traditions that we don't have to adhere to because they're not laws?
And they have a playbook for doing so. The authoritarian playbook. And it's pretty consistent from Venezuela to Hungary, Turkey to Brazil. It contains 7 steps.
Oh, 7 steps. That sounds like a list. Here we go. Circling a list on the board. All right.
Okay. So first,
they
they politicize independent institutions like the civil service, law enforcement, and eventually the military.
Okay. Politicize institutions. Well, institutions is like institutional or systemic. So I'm circling systemic or institutional. Okay. So authoritarians do that. Not liberal democracies would not do that. Those declaring themselves to be liberal democracies or part on the liberal democratic side of things would never politicize an institution. Okay.
Second, they spread disinformation, including from the government.
Right. Liberal democracies, those that love liberal democracy would never lie.
Third, they aggrandize executive power and undermine checks and balances.
Oh, aggrandize executive power and undermine checks and balances. Like, you mean like, executive orders? You mean like passing things that end up being sort of quasi not laws, but laws? Like, I don't know, DACA? Yeah, and as we know, Barack Obama was obviously a conservative authoritarian. I might not be saying that ironically.
Fourth, they quash dissent, from limiting what can be said and taught and read to using the regulatory state to punish critics.
Ah, yes, right. And only the right side of the aisle would ever do that.
Fifth, they scapegoat and delegitimize vulnerable groups.
Oh, like this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated? Something like that?
This has been the tyrant's favorite tool since antiquity.
No, you're not wrong.
Because if you can pit people against each other on the basis of race, religion, sexual orientation,
or medical decisions, or identity politics. Yeah, how many different ways can I say you're describing any particular party in power if they decide to go that direction? It doesn't matter what their declared side of the aisle is.
It's easier to pick their pockets of money and power. 6, they corrupt elections.
Yeah.
And finally, they incite violence.
Oh, they incite violence. Right. And how did that criminal charge go as far as the legal definition of incitement and so on? I still haven't seen Trump convicted of incitement. And
we have seen all of these play out in the United States in recent years.
Just only Trump. Only Trump. There are no examples from any Democratic presidents of practicing any of these. Sowing dissent, polarizing things, politicizing institutions, quashing debate. No, the only Trump.
And there's a reason why this playbook can succeed. It's not that people openly support authoritarianism or even secretly favor it.
Right.
But in a time of rapid change and uncertainty, the time when so many of us feel anxiety about the future, at a time when our
in a time when I have to occasionally pause the video because YouTube will zap me otherwise. Yeah, apologies for that. Just the rules of the particular road I play on.
The time when so many of us feel anxiety about the future. Mm-hmm. The time when our democracy and our politics seem so broken and so unable to solve our problems.
Yeah, it's not that people love authoritarianism. It's just that they're stupid.
It can be tempting to think the solution is just to give someone a little bit more power.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the pandemic again by any chance? You want to talk about people pushing back against authoritarianism in that era? And can you tell us who was presiding over the country during the bulk of that era? You want to talk about that a little bit at all?
I alone can fix it, we're told.
Yeah, I just heard that same sentiment just a few minutes ago from the guy currently running for president from the Democratic side of the aisle.
In times like these.
Yeah, that's true.
And the truth is, an all-powerful leader can cut through the morass. They don't need to negotiate legislation.
Right. And only Trump has ever behaved this way.
Or overcome filibusters.
Right.
Or defend their policies in court. They can just do it.
Yeah. Executive orders. Yeah, like with the border and what Trump just did. Pardon me. Now I'm pulling a Biden, what Trump just did, what Biden just did with an executive order, what Barack Obama did with DACA. Yeah, you're right. Presidential fiat. I'm not a fan of it either. So if our speaker is against presidential fiats, if he's against executive orders and going outside of congressional authority to make decisions on things that should be handled by the legislature and argued in the courts, well, I'm all for it. I wonder if he would have any criticisms for a president other than Trump in talking about these topics.
Mandate that more housing be built.
How about any other kind of mandates you'd like to talk about? You put up Xi Jinping. Okay, so far you got Trump and Xi Jinping. You bring up the word mandate and you go to China.
We train enough doctors.
Castro.
That we make our system ruthlessly efficient. Maybe discard people who are unproductive.
Okay, so guilt by association here. Trump, Xi Jinping, and Fidel Castro are all on the same page in your book? Okay.
Or who have disabilities. Or who are just old.
Yeah. You know all those old camps that Trump set up? You know all those camps that Trump set up for religious outsiders like the Uyghurs in China? Yeah, and you know those seriously, Fidel Castro, dude. Oh, well, okay, so you bring up the trains of the Holocaust. This is where you see it going. Trump had 4 years in office. He violated all the traditions. When did these things happen? Vladimir Putin. How many wars did Trump start again? You're making me angry here a little bit because you're forcing me to have to defend Donald Trump. But when you put up the worst of history against Donald Trump, who oversaw up until the advent of the pandemic, one of the greatest increases in American economic wealth that we'd seen since the Obama administration. And I can attest to that just from the meager investments that I am able to contribute to on a regular basis. The value of that went through the floor in the first 3 months under Biden. Now you say, oh, it was the pandemic and everything else. Yeah, true, but it really wasn't coming back up. And it's nothing now like it was under Trump. So if I have one like demonstrable element to praise Trump for, if we're going to give credit to the president for everybody's economic well-being, I was in a much better shape under Trump than I am now. But anyway, you were saying?
That we confiscate people's property to enrich and empower the leader and his allies.
Are you still talking about Trump? You're just talking about authoritarians in general? Because why did you bring up Trump in comparison with these yokels?
That we imprison anyone who stands in the way.
Yeah. How about that?
Or who speaks out.
Yeah, how about that too? You got anything you'd like to say about modern times?
Or questions the leader at all.
Yeah.
Because that is how it always goes.
Oh, so like, I don't know, the mainstream media and most of the political left in this country saying that Joe Biden is as sharp as a tack behind closed doors. He's quick on his feet and so on and so forth. I mean, no party claiming to be liberal or associating themselves with the word democracy would spread disinformation or prop up an all-powerful leader, a leader that says that he is the only solution to the problem, et cetera, and so forth. I know I keep hammering this home, but if our speaker here, and admittedly, I'm sure this talk was filmed before relatively recent events, but for him to pretend that this kind of thing only happens on one side of the political spectrum is, at best, and I'll be diplomatic here, disingenuous. And what was that about disinformation again?
Just ask the young person in Nicaragua whose father was disappeared for saying the wrong thing.
Okay.
Or the student in Turkey who was arrested for attending a banned art exhibit.
Yeah, and all of these have exact mirrors to Trump policies. You brought them up. Are you going to clarify who's done what and who hasn't?
With a businessman in Russia whose company was seized to buy loyalty from an oligarch. Or the gentleman I met last night who spent time in a maximum security prison merely for calling out for freedom and democracy in Zimbabwe.
Do you have any like events that you'd like to associate with Trump there? You brought him up.
Yeah, I know. There are some Americans who say, but that can't happen here.
Well, I don't know if it can't happen here, but it hasn't happened here in the modern day. So
that's what all those people thought. The truth is, the only way it can happen here is if we think that it can't.
January 6th. Right. January 6th is right up there with internment camps and the seizure of businesses and jailing dissidents and so on. Yeah. Yeah. Are you sure that's the example you want to bring up?
All right. That's pretty dark.
Now you're going to laugh. Yeah. Yeah. It was so dark. It's a punchline, I guess.
Don't worry. It's okay.
Okay. I'm going to circle leaves out vital context. Let's see. Weightless example. As compared to all the other individuals and countries he named, bringing up Trump doesn't work. So, anything else?
Because we still have the time and the power to prevent that playbook from succeeding. How? By exercising the one thing that democracies guarantee that autocracies take away. The power to choose.
Yeah. Donald Trump's no longer president. He might be again. And then after that, he's out. He's not going to be given an extra term. He's not going to change the Constitution or the law to allow himself to run for a third time. So at worst, you may have another 4 years of Donald Trump. And then the authoritarian is a civilian. Well, then what do you do?
Because underneath it all, democracy lives or dies based on choices.
Yes. Right? And what choices were afforded the Democrats in the primaries this year for president? Oh, that's right. None.
In big moments like elections, sure. but also the countless choices that citizens make every day as participants in a democracy. That's what I learned from those binders.
Well, unfortunately, we're a representative republic. I don't know if you know that. We're not actually a functional democracy in that way. We use democratic systems, but that's not what our country is based on. I don't know if you know that. Thank you, John Miller. Who's going to tell the speaker we're a republic? Hey, great minds think alike. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this guy was apparently the lawyer for Barack Obama, or a lawyer there, of a constitutional lawyer. And so obviously he would know that we're a democracy and not a republic or something.
Right? Choices made in the spotlight, choices made when no one is looking, they add up. And they either fortify democracy or they chip it away.
Okay. Well, tell me about your boss and DACA. Tell me about your boss and attempting to give amnesty to the family members of illegal immigrants. Tell me about that. And then tell me, was that fortifying or chipping away at the democratic process? You want to talk about that for a minute? How about the droning of American citizens? Do you want to talk about whether that fortified or chipped away at the democratic process? You really should be saying the democratic process.
So, how we doing on this front? Well, we have made some good choices that are cause for hope.
Like, hope. Yeah, hope was your boss's tagline. Like what?
And some not so good ones that are reasons for real concern.
Such as?
And so I want to give an example of a democracy-saving choice. An
example of a democracy-saving choice. Okay.
Example of a democracy-destroying choice, and we'll end on choices we all can make to be the difference.
Okay. I love examples. I'm always demanding them of these things, so I'm happy to hear. Give me some active examples.
So first, the democracy-saving choice.
Okay.
Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss stepped up to serve as election workers during a pandemic to help their fellow citizens in the state of Georgia vote in 2020. And they did their jobs with honor and integrity, never imagining what was going to happen next.
I dare ask what was going to happen next. The legitimacy was questioned and was ultimately certified. Is that what happened next?
An autocrat and his allies, desperate to hold on to power,
who you are artfully avoiding saying the name of as though we're talking about Voldemort,
falsely accused them of stealing the election from him. Their lives were turned upside down.
Yep.
They became the subjects of vile, unrelenting, unthinkable intimidation and harassment.
And that's all deplorable. And what was the ultimate result of these accusations? How did our democracy falter or fail as a result of this?
They received racist death threats. Ruby was forced to flee her home on the advice of the FBI for her own safety.
Okay.
After what happened to them, it would have been entirely understandable if they had decided to slink off into their private, quiet lives. And had they chosen to do that, we would have moved that much further away from protecting democracy.
Really? Okay. Well, as, again, illegal and deplorable as those actions, accusations, threats, and so on were to those two women, how did that harm democracy? What did that do to overturn the election results in Georgia?
But they made a different choice.
Oh, they did.
They chose to stand up. Represented by our organization, they brought multiple lawsuits against the people and organizations who defamed them.
And obviously, since our entire democracy is corrupt and broken, they were stopped at every particular turn, and their lawsuits failed completely, and they had no opportunity to seek justice. Right?
Depriving them of their reputations and their safety. They testified before Congress.
How could they? I thought our democracy was broken and they didn't have such opportunity. Oh, you mean that the established set of laws were still in place when those laws were threatened to be broken against their rights?
About how a former president and his allies, rather than protecting them as public servants and citizens, targeted them, putting their lives in danger.
And what was the result of these lawsuits and everything?
And because they chose to invoke our laws and our courts and our institutions in democracy's defense,
which still survived despite 4 years of Donald Trump that allowed them to do so.
they are establishing a deterrent against anyone doing to others what has been done to them.
And in all sincerity, I say good. Great. So what you're saying is that someone came along and threatened the established laws that protect people in the positions those women were in. They fought back, and those same laws that were already in place when the events occurred are being enforced and or galvanized as a result. And I'm supposed to fear for democracy on the basis of this example. Why?
But not everyone is making such good choices.
Okay.
And most worryingly, people with far more institutional power than Ruby and Shea are making choices that are as bad for democracy as Ruby's and Shea's were good.
Oh, like staying on in a presidential election when it's obvious you don't have the mental capacity to fulfill the duties of your office? Like that kind of threat to democracy in a constitutional crisis? I know. It's an example that might not be relevant to our speaker in the time that he put this together, but all the same.
So, a brief lesson from history.
Okay.
Between World War I and World War II, far-right authoritarian parties were rising across Europe.
Right. Okay, so now we're going back to 1930s Germany, by any chance, are we? Italy, etc. Spain, perhaps? And still, you haven't, I don't believe you've actually invoked the name of Voldemort in this talk. You've just implied.
In Belgium and Finland, the mainstream center-right parties saw those on the right flank for what they were, threats to the very foundations of their democratic systems.
Right.
So they did the hard thing.
Okay.
They chose to unite with their traditional opponents on the left to block the autocrats from power.
Okay. And?
In Italy and Germany, the mainstream center-right parties made a different choice. They calculated that they could ride the energy of those on their far right to power, and then once there, sideline the extremist leaders.
Okay, and obviously Italy and Germany had the same constitution, system of laws, checks and balances as the United States, which is why all of that got tossed aside, and those things happened, I guess.
We know how tragically that turned out.
Yeah, you keep associating modern times with those events. Yeah.
Well, in recent years, too many on America's center-right have made a similar calculation.
Center-right. A similar the center-right are on par with Germany and Italy of the 1930s. Admittedly, I am not a political scientist. I am not a historian of any particular note, but I'd really be curious to hear from someone who is informed on these things if that assessment is accurate.
That they too can ride the energy on the extremist right to power and then sideline the extremist leader. They still have time to make a different choice.
Oh, okay. You want to name any names here? Name any groups or something specifically?
Because protecting democracy requires people who disagree about politics and policy to put those differences aside when the very foundations of self-government itself are at risk.
No. You don't put disagreements aside. You accept that there will be disagreements. No, that's So, in a rather Trojan horse fashion, our speaker has just given a my way or the highway argument to political dissent. If someone says that actions or speeches or anything else is supposedly approaching something like 1930s fascist Italy and Germany, that's all it takes. Put aside your disagreements, guys. Work towards the common good that we all agree upon, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, twisting elbow.
Now, the choice that Ruby and Shea made and the choice too many center-right electeds have made are representative of thousands of similar choices that are being made on each side of the pro and anti-democracy ledger.
The pro and anti-democracy ledger, divide and conquer. Okay, so you name two heroes, but you're not willing to call out any specific villains in this diatribe. That's interesting. Just implying without saying any names. Calling out the admirable ones, but leaving those who are anti-democracy just an amorphous, unnamed blob that you put into a box of center-right. Okay.
Add it all up, you basically get a draw in which our democracy is teetering on the edge.
Oh, our democracy's teetering on the edge. Okay.
But therein lies our opportunity.
Oh, so in the midst of a crisis, you see opportunity
to tip the balance.
Oh, how
because
so?
We all have choices to make as well.
Yeah, there are right choices and there are wrong choices, according to you.
Yes, to vote, and we must do that. But just as importantly, choices about how we relate to one another as citizens.
Oh, okay. Well, what choices might those be?
I know it may seem like a quaint notion, but how we act towards one another is fundamental to democracy.
Oh, you're right. So anybody who's not a citizen really shouldn't be part of either the argument or the process. Got anything to say about that? Got anything to say about your boss and DACA and what he attempted to do? I know, I keep harping on it, but he talks about authoritarianism. He talks about taking actions beyond the law. And he was a lawyer for Barack Obama. I know it's just one example, but does that fortify or chip away at democracy?
These are the habits of the heart that Alexis de Tocqueville credited as being responsible for the maintenance of a democratic republic in the United States.
A democratic republic? A democratic republic. Is that accurate? Or is that disinformation?
Because how our elected officials behave and how our government functions is almost always downstream of how we act as citizens.
Oh, is it really downstream? All our politicians are what, pillars of virtue or something?
If we meet our neighbors' differences with suspicion and fear and hostility,
our
elected officials are likely to do the same.
Oh, yeah, because if anybody says that they're center-right right now, by your calculus, they should be met with fear and suspicion and disdain. Right? Because they are just 2 steps away from becoming fascist 1930s Germany. You want to rethink how you're framing this, or probably not?
And authoritarians thrive on that sort of division and hatred.
Again, do you want to go back to your comments classifying anyone on the center-right in America as being the neo-1930s fascist Italy? You want to try that again, Buckaroo?
Autocrats want to feed our fears.
Yeah, obviously so. Tell us more about the center-right in this country and 1930s fascist Germany. I'm going to keep saying it because you just seem to have forgotten what you just said.
Because when we're afraid, we're more likely to see a strong man as a necessary means of protection. But if we make a different choice.
Oh, okay. Right. And who is the current strong man against the defending against what you have already classified and associated with internment camps, the seizure of businesses, and the imprisonment of dissidents? Who would the strong man on the opposite side of that be in the current time that has sown fear of what someone may do when they are in office, which were the same things that they were fearing he would do in office the last time, and most of them didn't even happen or get even close. Oh, man.
We choose to meet our neighbors' differences as opportunities for curiosity and for connection.
Right. And influence and leverage and indoctrination.
Our elected officials will eventually follow suit as well. And then
will
we
they
put democracy on home court advantage against
okay.
authoritarianism.
Oh, okay.
But right now, kind of acting too much out of fear.
Right now, we're acting too much out of fear. Right. And who, sorry, who has been fueling that? Just in, let's say, I don't know, the last 8 years. Oh, that's right. Both parties have engaged in that. Would you like to acknowledge the reality of the situation at all? Your former employer, Barack Obama, was innocent of that kind of thinking and that kind of rhetoric. Joe Biden is innocent of that kind of thinking and that kind of rhetoric. Only Trump. If you're not going to act in good faith, if you're not going to be honest about the realities of politics in general and not about party division, then you are not a credible witness, counselor. Just saying.
Authoritarianism. But right now, kind of acting too much out of fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fear our democracy is dying, and that.
Who is promoting the idea that our democracy is dying? Who have I heard tell me over and over and over and over that our democracy is dying? Who is instilling fear of the absolute destruction of our country? And what do they say is the remedy?
That's causing us to be hostile to one another.
Yes.
I will admit, I am guilty of this too.
Okay, well, there you go. Circling self-vilification or wretchedness on the board. If you're guilty of it too, then why are you focusing on one side of the aisle, might I ask? Also, I'm going to circle marginalization for his previous examples talking about political dissidents being jailed, showing pictures of trains in Germany in the 1930s and so on. Let's see, what else? Also, benevolent condescension. I think just the absolute hypocrisy of his statements so far are good enough for me.
Right.
Okay.
So I want to share.
Are you going to share with us the instance where you were the bad guy?
Something I've been reflecting on.
Okay.
That is helping me reorient how I think about and approach this moment.
No. When were you guilty? When were you guilty of sowing fear and division? You don't get to drop that bomb and then not specify, if for no other reason than to warn others of your side of the aisle what a slippery slope looks like. Come on, man.
It's a verse from a Leonard Cohen song.
Oh, goody.
Appropriately titled Democracy.
Oh, I can't wait. Actually, I can wait. I can wait for Matthew James. Thank you, Matthew James. A game tonight, sir. Thank you for both shows. You're wonderful. Oh, well, thank you, Matthew James. That makes me all blush and shufflefoot and stuff. No, really, thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. Thank you for your generosity, and glad you enjoyed the shows. Yeah, the one I didn't plan and the one that's here right now. It's been a busy night. I hope my voice lasts the next few minutes. Okay. Sorry, what were you saying again?
Think about and approach this moment.
Right.
It's a verse from a Leonard Cohen song.
Mm-hmm.
Appropriately titled Democracy.
Okay, so not even your own idea or concept, but just somebody else's abstract song lyrics. Okay.
It goes like this.
Okay. Are you going to sing it?
It's coming to America first.
Eddie Murphy.
The cradle of the best and of the worst.
Wow, what a lyric.
It's here we got the range and the machinery for change. It's here we got the spiritual thirst.
And these sentiments only reside in the hearts of those on one particular side of the political spectrum.
It's here the family's broken, and it's here the lonely say that the heart has got to open in a fundamental way.
Oh, wow. It might be more impactful if you had words of your own rather than a song that could be interpreted by anybody for any particular way. Also talks about sort of a unification of human experience rather than calling some people inherently or potentially the worst evil the earth has ever seen, and everybody on the other side being virtuous and true.
Democracy is coming to the USA.
Wow, that's really profound. If only you'd thought of that.
We tend to think of the moment we're in negative terms. It's a dark and scary time.
Like you did when you classified the current condition of our democracy by showing off pictures of January 6th after showing off pictures of Xi Jinping and sweatshops and Fidel Castro, that kind of thing?
Portending the end of democracy.
Which you've just done.
But in our long journey as a nation and a world, in our long quest to achieve the thing we've aspired to but never had, a truly inclusive, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy.
That's been the goal? Okay, well, anyway, circling diversity, equity, and inclusion on the board. I think I need to listen to that part again. I need to listen to that part again. Hold on.
We tend to think of the moment we're in negative terms. It's a dark and scary time, portending the end of democracy.
Again, that's been your through line all the way up to this point.
But in our long journey as a nation and a world, in our long quest to achieve the thing we've aspired to but never had, a truly inclusive, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy.
We have an inclusive, multiracial, multi-ethnic republic. I don't know if you know this, but we have a fairly diverse population as compared to, say, China or India or most nations in Africa. I don't know if you know that. I mean, we didn't get the term melting pot in this country from nowhere, but I guess we still have a long way to go.
Each major advance towards that goal has been preceded by a crucible of crisis and conflict.
So again, you're looking at this crisis as an opportunity.
When brave Black Americans marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma.
What were they marching for? What were they marching for? To have the country not assess people on the basis of their skin color. And now you've determined success on the basis of appearances. Okay.
Secure the right to vote.
Yeah.
There's no downplaying the pain and suffering.
Nope. That was an accidental pause on my part, but I'll take it because YouTube likes it.
Cracked skulls that they endured.
You're right. That not good. Not good. Thankfully, we have laws against that now, don't we?
But they led our nation to the fuller democracy on the other side.
You're right. They did.
I think we're living through a similar moment.
Oh, we are. Okay. What is the comparable movement now to marching for voting rights for Black people in America?
The last gasp of an old order making its final stand against the future.
Oh, is that what's happening? Is that what's happening? Old order. You want to talk about old and last gasps going on right now? Okay.
And if we do as the lyrics suggest, if we open our hearts in a fundamental way to each other,
while completely vilifying and demonizing people on our political opposition, comparing them to communists and Nazis and so on. Yeah, it's sure. On
the other side of this crisis, democracy, true democracy,
true democracy, not that fake democracy, true democracy, which we don't have right now.
Democracy, true democracy, I am confident is coming to the USA.
Wow. That's great. Okay. I feel so much more assured now that you've said that without doing any self-reflection of note on here, except to suggest that you too, at one time, under some circumstance, unsaid, participated in fear-mongering and saying nothing else. What was that about disinformation again?
Those binders that I inherited that night in 2009.
Full of traditions, not laws.
They never made it past that administration.
So they were traditions, not laws.
When the new administration came into office, there was no one for me to give them to who would honor them like so many had before.
They were traditions, not law. You are a lawyer, correct? You understand the difference between a law and a suggestion, don't you? Your argument should be, let's firm up the laws controlling the executive. Let's take some of these traditions and codify them into law. Because if they're not laws, then what are you complaining about? Except acting like a snob.
So I'm giving them to you.
You're giving traditions about what the executive should or should not do in office. You are giving them to... Okay.
To all of us.
To all of us. What am I supposed to do with a binder full of traditions and norms and customs meant for the executive branch of this country? You better finish off strong here, not Jeremy Strong.
If our experiment in self-government is to continue, we are the ones who are going to choose to protect it.
With our vote for the correct party.
To protect it. We. The people.
Oh, wow. How profound. Is that another thing you didn't come up with yourself?
We have this choice because that's what democracy protects.
I don't know if your version of quote-unquote democracy protects that, when you've already said that the center-right in this country, and certainly then the right in this country, are just 2 or 3 goose steps away from 1930s Germany.
Democracy is about having choices.
Oh,
Authoritarianism is about not having them.
Oh, okay. You want to talk about Biden in the primaries by any chance? I know. I might be beating a dead horse here.
Make the wrong one, and we can absolutely lose that freedom.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But ultimately, the final choice will be ours.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. Profound. Chicago Mike, thank you so much. Just got here. Why a Stephen Wright giving a TEDx speech? Well, not Stephen Wright so much. Look up Jeremy Strong. Look up the actor Jeremy Strong and tell me that our guy here isn't a, maybe not a dead ringer, but awfully close. Let me find a good, that wasn't too bad. There you go. Yeah, look up Jeremy Strong. Just go on, use the Google. Don't Google Project 2025. That's a waste of time. But yeah, give a quick search for Jeremy Strong. If you don't already know the show's Succession, look up Jeremy Strong. Thank you, John Miller. Democracy protects squat. It's the Constitution and Bill of Rights that are supposed to protect the people. Yes. The Constitution, our balance of power, checks and balances, the judiciary, the legislature, the executive, that protects things, not democracy just on the basis of democracy. There has to be a framework and an infrastructure around which democracy operates to protect these things. Shadowclaw, Scribe what he said about 1930s leaders is inaccurate. Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin were part of socialist parties. They were different parties, but all social. Well, that's details. That's details. And our speaker would not participate in disinformation to try to prove a political point. It'd be fine. It's fine. It's fine. Anyway, that being said, let's move on to the bingo card. Remember, this is bingo card B. Links to the bingo cards are in the description below if you need to get your bingo card ready. And let's see where we are at. This is where I'm at. So I'm going to go over the bingo card one more time by myself. If you guys have any arguments for squares to be circled, hold on to them. I will get to you momentarily. Oh, but before that, Assassin of the Gray, thank you so much. So he wants people who do not vote how he wants deleted to protect democracy. Well, I'm not quite sure. He had some mixed messages in the course of his presentation. I got to shrink this down a little bit. Pardon me. Shrink this down. Is that? I can go up one more. That work? That works. Okay. Yeah. We all need to understand one another. We all need to open our hearts to one another, but don't trust those center-right folks. You know where that leads. Shows picture of train in Germany. Boy, oh boy. All right, let's see what we got here. Contradicts own point or argument. Boy, howdy. As I just said, open your hearts, but only for those that agree with you. So circling that one. Feminism, not really. The only example he brought up were the ladies from the Georgia election, but he didn't focus on their gender so much. I didn't hear anything feminist in the course of the presentation, really. Microaggressions or unconscious bias. Well, certainly he was showing off his own. So I think that's fair. Let me circle that there and get that going. Okay, we're getting close here. Privilege. Did he say privilege? I thought at the beginning, I think he said he was either his honor to serve the president, or what did he say it was his privilege? But barring an exact quotation of him saying privilege, was there enough there to say so? Well, I guess I could see an argument in there, but I'm going to leave it in case somebody else wants to give a shot. Plays victim. Now, this is a tough one. Did he play the victim personally? I mean, he vilified himself in indicating that at some point or another he'd engaged in fear-mongering without giving us specifics. But did he play the victim? I don't know. I'm not sure. Economic disparity. Yeah, he did talk about, in giving his examples of other authoritarian regimes and places, he talked about forced labor and stealing businesses from people and things like that. Argumentative non sequitur. Boy, oh boy, can I count the ways? Yeah, the binder's full of non-laws and him whining about people deciding not to go along with the traditions and the policies. Whereas if he really cared about that, I mean, if somebody handed me, here's the thing, if I was the lawyer to the president, right, and somebody came along and handed me 3 binders full of unofficial policies, procedures, traditions, etc., of what the executive could or could not do, and I knew, looking at them, these are all just handshake deals as far as behavior and conduct as far as the executive's concerned, and if I was told these had been handed down since the Truman administration, I might say to myself, golly, maybe we should work to formalize these. If I were a lawyer for the president, if I was some kind of constitutional scholar or expert, I might say, why are we standing on the paper-thin foundation of a gentleman's agreement when it comes to executive power in the United States? He talks about, does something fortify democracy or chip away at it? How about a bunch, 3 binders full of unofficial rules? Do you think that puts a risk to democracy, or does that fortify it? So, yeah. Attempt to coin new buzzword or buzz phrase. I don't know that he did that. I don't know that he did. I didn't hear anything new. He named his organization. I don't think he came up with something new. Patriarchy. Again, just like feminism, I didn't hear anything feminist in as far as ideology, and he didn't talk about men being in charge of things or something, so I don't think that washes. Anecdote that probably never happened. Well, let's see. Shall we count the ways? He brings up mandate. Well, that's not going to anecdote that never happened. He was talking about a different kind of mandate. An anecdote that never happened. Well, I could take the example from Shadowclaw regarding the 1930s, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin, etc., where he talked about specifically Italy and Germany. Somehow he left Russia out of that. But yeah, they were National Socialists. I don't know. I'll leave that. I think there's probably somebody with a better argument than I have. White supremacy. Well, if not bringing up Nazi Germany, isn't at least, at least by implication, bringing it up. Childhood or family anecdote. He never talked about his family. He never talked about his childhood or growing up somewhere. He never talked about that. So I think we're done on that one. And lastly, word salad. Yes, because he was so all over the place, and especially bringing up song lyrics and making that as though there was somehow something profound that we're supposed to pay attention to, or that's supposed to mean something. Again, he brings up something that's unofficial and then talks about it like it's an official decree. Kind of interesting. Anyway, also something that's interesting. We got 2 bingos out of that one.
Bingo.
What?
Of course!
Bingo. What?
Bingo!
Yeah!
Of course! Of course!
2 bingos. Oh my God, double bingo. All right, so that's the card as I have it. If you have arguments for squares to be circled, put them in the chat now. I think there's probably some room for them. I'll scroll up here a little bit. Be sure to tag me in your comment, and if I already missed it in the flow of the chat, just please repost it. John Miller, Scribelight definitely contradicts his own point by using the Nazis for far-right extremists. That's true. That is true. So if I hadn't already circled it, that would be a good one too. Let's see. What else we got? Assassin of the Gray. He is a victim of who whiteness. He is tainted with the new original sin. Well, if you're talking about white supremacy, yeah, we already kind of got there. But yeah, I was kind of surprised that he didn't further debase himself and tell us how he was acting badly in fear-mongering previously. But oh well. Abgas Diaboli, I think his opening spiel could be qualified as him speaking of his privilege of getting to serve in his position as keeper of the norms of the executive. Yeah. And I mean, and on a more fundamental note, just talking about the extent of executive power is in itself a privilege that nobody else in the country enjoys. So I think on that basis, I can agree with you and myself. And so we'll get that one. Okay, privilege is on the board. Thank you, Advocatus. What's next? God Ready, the one true God of all rats. Scribelight. That could be that someone did not need to take it from him due to them having copies, or did he take the only copy away and that would be a no-no? Oh, you mean talk about the 3 binders? As far as an anecdote that probably never happened. Well, I'm not sure. Did he say that he tried to give them to his successor in the office, but they wouldn't accept them? Or, yeah, I mean, his story was that at the inauguration ball or something, he was called away by his predecessor in, well, I guess it would have to be the Bush administration to get the binders for executive conduct, which again was from a Republican administration. So I don't have any reason to think that he was lying about that. So I think, yeah, they just handed him the reference binders that everybody else had used. So I think if that's what you're going for, I'm not quite sure. If you're talking about an anecdote that never happened, I don't have any reason to believe that didn't happen. If you've got a different spin on it, let me know. Scribelight plays victim. The entire point was the evil scourge of authoritarianism, which he said we are all subject to be a victim to. I mean, I guess by extension, you're not wrong, but at the same time, it kind of dilutes the point when he's not more directly making himself the victim of something. You know, if he had included a story where, I don't know, a Trump policy affected him directly or something, then maybe. But I think I need something a little bit more specific to the individual. Got it right. Yes, he said no one would take it from. Oh, so he said no one. Oh, yeah, right. Nobody at the Trump administration would take them from him. He offered, but they didn't want them. I don't know. There's not enough information for me to say that's not true. He didn't. If he'd given a name, or he'd gotten more specific about an interaction. You know, if he called them up and says, "Hey, I have some folders here of traditions and things for the executive," and they're like, "Oh, no, thanks." I from the Trump administration, I could believe it, but he didn't give me enough to say that it didn't happen. So, yeah, this is the problem with anecdote that probably never happened. It has to be something that has enough information attached to it that I can say it's too good to be true or too closely enforces his argument. And that one-off comment, I don't think it rises to that level. I'm happy to be challenged on that, but that alone I don't think is enough. Advocatus, I don't know. I think we're all going to die because of evil right-wingers is playing victim. It's fear-mongering, which he said he only engaged in at one time. So contradicts own point or argument. That's a good one, but I don't know about plays victim. Not sure about that one. Assassin the Great Scribe, it. Those three binders are status quo in writing, and Donald Trump was not elected to uphold status quo. Well, that's the other thing too. Like I said, that's why his story makes a certain level of sense to me, at least thematically, between the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. If somebody came up and said, "Oh, here's some unofficial rules of the road for the executive," and they're like, "Nah." Because even if that wasn't a publicized event, if you had a Trump loyalist as the counterpart to this guy, him taking advice or unofficial guidance from the Obama administration would be a no-no. So that's why that anecdote doesn't seem too outlandish to me. That's why. And advocates, yes, yeah, administrations do hand over things to one administrator to the next, you know, whether it's information, intelligence, advice, or otherwise, papers. You know, it's a transition of power. That whole peaceful transition of power part. 3 binders full of unofficial traditions is not power that someone else needs to necessarily pay attention to. This is why, again, our speaker was being a little bit covertly damaging his own argument by saying that we have to worry about the possible powers of the executive when he was happy to operate under unofficial rules for the executive for the entirety of his time with Obama. Like I said, if he really cared that much about fortifying democracy, he would have sued in the abstract sense, not necessarily in the legal sense, or he would have petitioned Obama to make the most reasonable of those traditions law, or work with Congress to do so, to make sure that there were, you know, safeguards against executive overreach or abuse in the future. He didn't do that. He just stuck to the binders. So I'm not, again, I'm not so jazzed about our speaker's interpretation of either his role or the positions of others in the country. But with that, everybody, I hate to say it, I'm starting to lose my voice, if you couldn't tell already. I've been talking for several hours now because of the Biden press conference and now into the TEDx. So we got 2 bingos so far. If you have any arguments for squares to be circled after the closure of the show, by all means, leave them in the comments. It has been the case several times now where I have circled squares after the show, and those squares have sometimes led to post-show bingos. So if you have such an argument or an idea, whether it's something I missed here, and apologies again, I'm going to have to wrap up. I'm already feeling my voice kind of getting strained. Or you're listening in the future, leave them below, and I will get to them and evaluate them accordingly. And then if there is a new bingo or something, I will post an updated bingo card to the Discord server. Did you know I have a Discord server? Let's get that out of the way, shall we? Let's see. Let me do that right here and now. Okay, there is a link in the chat now for the Discord server. If you'd like to join the Discord server, all you have to do is click on that link, and you'll find yourself on the landing channel called Say Hello. And in addition to saying hello, all you have to do is give the secret word. The secret word will tell me that you actually watch the show, are not a bot, and have earned the right, the privilege, the entitlement of joining the Discord server. Today's secret word is democracy. To say hello, democracy, and I'll know that you watched this stream. Alternately, if you watched the previous stream, you could say hello, hello, or hello anyways, or hello, Vice President Trump. All sorts of options that tell me that you actually watched the show. Beyond that, Sunday, there will be a Sunday stream. I'm not sure about what yet, but I'll decide between now and Sunday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, where I'll talk about a thing. It may be a follow-up to the fallout from our press conference with the president earlier, or the current zeitgeist about the vice president and her chances at becoming a presidential candidate for a second time after she failed so miserably the first time. I guess we'll find out on Sunday, so look forward to that. Also, a little bit of a prognosticating ahead. July 26th, Friday, July 26th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern will be the next installment of Living on Borrowed Crime, at least the panel edition, and not an interview per se, wherein we will discuss the most common objections or critiques to the true crime genre. And so far, a scheduled to appear Matt Orchard, Dave's Lemonade, Misery Machine, True Red Crime, and Mr. Black Pasta. So looking forward to that one. Otherwise, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved. You have very, very little to do. Everybody who donated, either to myself or to the fundraisers pinned to the top of the chat box. Guys, thank you very much, so much for your generosity tonight, both in this show and the previous. I don't know what else to say other than I will do my best to pay it forward. Elsewise, everybody, I hope you have a good rest of your Thursday, a good Friday ahead of you, a good weekend as well. I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.